Alright, so now to finish off, a couple of things for housekeeping. The basics, right? So we've just built a project, we've added a bunch of modules and enclosures. So what's the difference now when we're ordering these and the rubber meets the road? How do I get a hold of these? Where do I put them inside of Design Center? How do I get them from my customer service team? So I've launched the ordering wizard, and you'll notice on the left hand side here enclosures are listed. And now they are expandable. So for example, underneath enclosure number 1, I can order just the enclosure, or I can order a module parent, which includes the module and the terminal boards, or I can choose just the terminal boards and the enclosure. Now what this means is that the terminal boards for these specific modules, in this case, this module is the SDM12-EM, the new module. And it will just ship the enclosure and the terminal boards for you to mount and install in the rough-in period. And then later you can come back in, right, and you can select just the modules, as you typically would, because now the terminal boards, as you remember, do not ship mounted inside of the enclosure. So now you can order just the modules as you need. Now those are for the new standard modules for dimming and their terminal boards. If you remember, in the other enclosure that we added, we also had a bunch of the other modules. We had an older standard dimming module, plus we had the currently shipping fan module and electronic dimming module, etc., relay module. So same thing goes here. I want the enclosure, maybe just the enclosure, or maybe I want the enclosure and the terminal boards. So now you can go through and check each one, and then later on come back in and order again specifically the modules that you need for the project. Okay, so this is new inside of this version of 3.0, where the modules and terminal boards have been separated out, and that's really important that you remember that for your ordering purposes moving forward. This will how you're going to take care of these modules and enclosures moving forward. Similarly, this can be done on the website, where the terminal boards and the modules and enclosures are all ordered separately as you need for. Now, in addition to the changes in the ordering wizard, we've also enhanced and improved the enclosure schedule for the installation and wiring diagrams for these enclosures. Let's take a look at that. So go to Reports. It's still called Enclosure Schedule. Go ahead and launch that. It's going to bring up this window, right? And you're taking a look at your enclosure schedule. A couple of things you'll notice. One, that 20 amp line feed for line A as an arc fault is now indicated with gray highlights. You can see that in the image here. Additionally, you're seeing that we've got 3 loads and a line feed. We got another 3 loads and a line feed. And we have the total wattage used plus the module number, SDM12-EM here in this particular case. So you can see we've got the new support for the new module here in the enclosure view. We do have in the secondary schedule here on enclosure number 2, that we have the legacy modules, or the legacy dimming module, as well as the other currently shipping relay and electronic dimming modules supported inside of here. A couple of changes in here across the top. You can see there's a new format for this, where we've got the model address location, which is the grouping, right? So where's this enclosure located? What's its enclosure group or enclosure location? As well as across the bottom, the project name, the new format for the schedules. So now that we've run through the various new enclosure and new module scenarios, let's run through a couple of less common scenarios that you may encounter in the field. So for example, you may need to convert a project that was built in 2.3 or the first revs of 3.0 to this new version of 3.0 because your modules and enclosures have not yet been installed, and you're going to place new modules and new enclosures in a project that's upcoming or about to happen, it's imminent. So how do we go about doing that? We'll also cover how you can put a new module in a legacy enclosure, an older enclosure, and some of the ramifications or details around that. So let's look at the first scenario where we want to change out an entire enclosure and module set for, or an entire enclosure for existing modules or a combination thereof. So what I would do is, here I am in enclosure view. This is 3.0, update 2, and you can see I've got a couple of legacy or older enclosures in here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up to the tree and right click, and I'm going to add an enclosure. So now what that's going to do, we'll slide over and show you, is just going to add a new enclosure. But what I'm going to do, it's pretty slick. What I'm going to take is, in the tree, take enclosure, the new enclosure that was added, and swap it, drag it on top of position number 1. That will force it to be a master or a main enclosure version with a controller. See? So you can see we've added a controller to that, force it in the right position. Next, what I'm going to do, you can see that here, enclosure 2B, which used to be enclosure 1, is now been moved down. I'm just going to simply take those modules and drag them up position by position, and see how it's populating those one at a time. Boom. So now that's created for me, if you will, a new enclosure with older modules. What if you needed an older enclosure with the new modules? So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to just undo a couple of those operations real quick and go back to an empty position, because we don't have the ability to just convert a module per se, unfortunately. It'd be great, but I don't have it. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to right click, say add module, right click, add module, right click, add module. So in this particular case, if you remember, we've added 48 loads, where before in this other enclosure we have 32. So you may be able to save some cost for your customer based on this particular scenario. So a couple of things you can do is you can expand these out and take and grab each load and move them up one at a time. See how we're doing? See how that it will expand those out for you? So we've got that position, all of those positions available to you, and you can take and grab any of those loads and move them up one at a time. You could have done the same thing across this way as well. I could have taken a load from this position here and dragged it over to a module position on this enclosure. Sometimes it's difficult when the enclosures are not visible. It won't just scan across for you. So pick the easiest method on what you're trying to do there, and just drag and drop those modules and loads as you need. Okay, so finishing out that process will allow you to have a new enclosure, a new set of modules, and then you can go through and delete these modules once you've dragged over all those loads. Now, it also may happen that you have a need for an older enclosure to not be changed out. It's already installed, and all you're trying to do is either add a module to the project or to change out an old module for a new module, and the older modules, the dimming modules, aren't available anymore. So what we're going to do here is we're going to drag a module, a standard dimming module, onto the enclosure, or I could have right clicked and say add module, and of course, because it's the default module, it will add it directly to that position. Now, a couple of things that you need to note about these modules, these new modules in a legacy enclosure. First off, you'll notice that by default there are only 4 load positions, 2, 3, 5, and 6, 8, 9, 11, and 12. That's due to the loads 1 and 4 and lines 1 and 4 and 2 and 3 for the particular modules, and those 4 loads disappearing because of legacy mode. Because what happens is we needed to add for you the ability to change out directly without having to worry about 12 loads on a module. You may only need to change out for the 8 loads. So what happens is, on this module as an example, you will see that there is a legacy mode checkbox, and I'm going to expand this out a little bit so you can see. that legacy mode. Okay, so that legacy mode checkbox can be unchecked or checked depending on what you're trying to do. So if you only need 4 loads per side and 1 line feed per side, then check the legacy mode, which will ship a specific set of terminal boards. If you uncheck legacy mode, it will allow 12 loads, and then of course it will ship a separate set of terminal boards that will allow for the 6 loads per side and the 2 line feeds per side to help keep those together. Okay, so something to keep in mind when you're working with legacy enclosures is the legacy mode option on the module, which will change the number of line feeds and loads and the terminal boards that will ship with that particular or for that particular module and that position that will need to be installed in that legacy enclosure. So there we've reviewed 2 things. One, where we just were over here, where we've added a new enclosure and a new set of modules, and of course needed to drag across all of our loads as necessary, or create a new enclosure for existing modules and just drag the modules over. Or in the second example, where we have a legacy enclosure and we have new modules that need to be positioned, we learned about the specific legacy mode, which will allow me to, as an installer, to separate between either 4 loads and 1 line feed per side, or 6 loads and 2 line feeds per side, and ship me different terminal boards based on what I'm trying to do.